Have you ever imagined inheriting a crumbling Victorian mansion and finding out it hides a set of priceless, long-lost artifacts? That's exactly what happens when our main character steps onto the overgrown grounds of Radcliffe House, and it kicks off a whirlwind of secret journals, midnight intruders, and a decades-old conspiracy that could rewrite history. If you love stories about unexpected fortunes, hidden legacies, and heart-stopping revelations, then you won't want to miss the incredible journey we're about to unfold. You'll discover how one man's loss became the key to protecting an ancient cultural treasure and how a community came together to defend the truth. So get comfortable and join us for the complete tale. Make sure to subscribe to our channel right now because we've got plenty more adventures and mysteries waiting for you. And trust us, you'll want to stay till the very last twist of this story to see how it all ends. Merrick Donovan had once believed that nothing could break a man more thoroughly than drought. He had tilled the same stretch of land in eastern Montana for over 40 years as his father and grandfather had before him. But after 4 successive seasons, where the skies refused to yield even a whisper of rain, his fields turned to pale dust and his livestock withered one by one. The blow that finally shattered him, however, wasn't the death of the farm. Heartbreaking though that was, it was the day he lost his wife Margaret to an aggressive cancer. Her final months drained both his savings and his spirit, and in her absence, Merrick felt a hollow ache that made the farm's barrenness seem trivial. He found himself in the cold hush of pre-dawn mornings asking the sunrise why fate had turned so cruel. No answer ever came, just another day of failing crops and mounting debts. At 64, Merrick wore the exhaustion plainly in his posture. His broad shoulders once seemed capable of carrying a small world. Now they sloped inward as if weighed down by invisible sacks of grief. His face, tanned and deeply creased from years under the sun, bore lines that told stories of hope, disappointment, and perseverance. Each step became heavier after Margaret's passing. The farmland was no longer merely a business, but a memory-laden ghost town of shared dreams. When the bank arrived with notices of foreclosure demanding he vacate the property, Merrick almost felt relief. Perhaps leaving would ease the relentless reminders of what he had lost. He packed up a few belongings, including a small wooden box that held Margaret's ashes and a photograph of her smiling beneath the wide-open Montana sky. His only companion now was his old dog, Kep, a once energetic cattle dog who at 12 mostly napped on the porch and kept watch over the fading farmland. Merrick couldn't bear to remain long enough to watch the official eviction. On a windless afternoon, he closed the rickety gate behind him, leaving behind a rusted tractor, a half-finished barn. Margaret always wanted to turn into a workshop and row upon row of dusty dead fields. That same evening, Merrick took refuge in a modest motel outside Billings, uncertain where life would lead him next. There in the sterile glow of a single table lamp, he found the letter that would alter his destiny. Postmarked from a law firm in Oregon he had never heard of, Crane & Lawson. The envelope was thick and official. At first, Merrick assumed it was yet another legal notice, perhaps a final claim from creditors. He almost tossed it aside, but something about the heavy embossed stationery and the name Radcliffe on the return address piqued his curiosity. He tore it open with a sense of resignation, bracing for bad news. Instead, he discovered an inheritance from a distant relative named Beatrice Radcliffe, who had passed away several weeks prior. Apparently, Margaret had mentioned Beatrice a few times, describing her as an eccentric aunt who left Montana decades before Merrick ever met his wife. According to the letter, Merrick was now the sole beneficiary of Radcliffe House, a Victorian-era estate in a town called Hartley Falls, Oregon, and a modest sum of money meant to cover immediate property taxes. Instantly, Merrick felt an odd mixture of bewilderment and cautious hope. After everything he had endured, could there really be a second chance waiting for him out west? He set the letter down, looked into Kep's trusting eyes, and whispered, "Maybe it's time we left these dead fields behind, old friend." 3 days later, Merrick found himself behind the wheel of his well-worn pickup, driving west toward the jagged silhouettes of the Cascade Range. Kep dozed in the passenger seat, occasionally lifting his head at an interesting roadside scent or an unexpected bump in the highway. Merrick had strapped Margaret's ashes securely on the floorboard, promising himself that wherever he finally settled, he would release her remains in a peaceful spot she would have loved. He felt a tinge of guilt for leaving so unceremoniously, but there was little left in Montana that wasn't tinged with heartbreak. The road carried him across wide plains and into rolling foothills. Each mile felt like another page turned in a life story that had grown stale with sorrow. He stopped only for fuel and coffee, each break offering fleeting moments of reflection. If this Radcliffe House turned out to be a ruin, he might sell it for whatever meager sum it was worth and move on. If it had promise, maybe, just maybe, he could find a small measure of peace there, far from memories of dusty farmland and hospital rooms. Memories of Margaret, though dear, were sometimes too painful to hold, so he let his mind slip into neutral focusing, instead on the immediate tasks of surviving another day, driving another mile. 2 nights later, he crested a hill at dusk and saw the modest lights of Hartley Falls glowing in the valley below. The town was smaller than he'd imagined, flanked by thick pine forests and a gently winding river. This wasn't the tourist-choked splendor of the Oregon coast. It was more subdued, a place that had probably thrived when timber was king and was now quietly finding its path in the modern age. Merrick rolled down the window, inhaling the crisp, woodsy air. It felt invigorating, a sharp contrast to the dusty dryness of home. He followed the directions from the law firm, meandering through narrow lanes until the truck's headlights illuminated an ornate iron gate. A crooked sign overhead bore the words Radcliffe House, and beyond it stood a 3-story Victorian edifice. In the fading twilight, the mansion's steep gables and turrets appeared both grand and haunting. Paint peeled from the elaborate trim, and some windows were boarded up. It looked like a place that had once sparkled with life, like a belle of the ball long since forgotten. In an attic trunk, pausing before the gate, Merrick switched off the engine. The stillness was absolute. Even Kep seemed to sense the gravity of this moment. The estate might be a relic of another century, but it was also a new beginning. For the first time in months, Merrick felt a flicker of curiosity and purpose. He unlatched the gate, pushed it open with a groan of protesting iron hinges, and drove up a gravel driveway framed by overgrown hedges and weeds. At the top of the circular drive, he parked beside a decrepit fountain that might once have welcomed guests with gentle sprays of water. As he stood on the mansion's broad porch, keys in hand, Merrick had a brief vision of Margaret's reaction had she been with him. She would have laughed at the peeling wallpaper, exclaimed at the antique fixtures, and insisted they set up a cozy reading nook overlooking the gardens. The thought brought a tender smile to his lips as he unlocked the door and ventured into the echoing foyer. The air inside smelled of dust and a faint mustiness, perhaps from years of neglect. Somewhere in the darkness, a floorboard groaned. Kep patted in at his side. "Well, boy," Merrick murmured, "we might as well see what old Aunt Beatrice left behind." The next morning brought the first real inspection of Radcliffe House. Sunlight revealed dust motes dancing through tall windows in a once majestic foyer. A grand wooden staircase led up into shadows, its balustrade adorned with intricate carvings. Merrick's boots echoed on the hardwood floors as he peered into each room. Parlors with fireplaces, bricked up, a dining room with an imposing table concealed under old tarps, in a second-floor gallery, lined with portraits so faded that the eyes in the paintings looked like pale ghosts. He wondered about Beatrice Radcliffe. Who was this mysterious aunt by marriage? Why had she singled him out? He felt more questions than answers echoing through these lonely corridors. By late afternoon, Merrick decided to tackle the library, a sprawling space lined floor to ceiling with empty shelves. Boxes lay scattered about, some containing old books, some filled with cracked leather bindings that disintegrated at a touch. Kep snoozed near the windows, occasionally lifting an ear. If Merrick muttered an expletive while rummaging through mounds of musty volumes, a wide desk stood at the center, its surface marred by scratches and water stains. Merrick began to clear the debris, certain that if anything valuable remained in Radcliffe House, a library might be the place to find it. That was when he noticed a slight give under his left foot, a single floorboard that felt looser than the rest. At first, he assumed it was just rotted wood, but something about the spacing of the nails and the tight seam suggested otherwise. Curious, Merrick fetched a screwdriver and carefully pried at one corner. The board lifted smoothly, revealing a shallow compartment. He expected maybe an old letter or a forgotten keepsake. Instead, he discovered a metal box heavy and locked with a small antique padlock. Intrigued, Merrick carried the box to the desk. It bore initials etched into the lid. BR, could that stand for Beatrice Radcliffe? Setting aside caution, he used a set of pliers to gently manipulate the rusted lock until it gave a metallic snap. The lid creaked open and dust puffed out, making him sneeze. Inside, he found several carefully wrapped bundles of yellowed paper, some black and white photographs, and a smaller parcel tied with twine. Sliding on his reading glasses, an undeniable reminder of his age, he examined the top page. Neat handwriting declared field notes of Dr. Beatrice Radcliffe. Confusion and fascination warred in his mind. He'd known from the attorney that Beatrice had an interest in archaeology, but these documents looked more like official records of historical digs than casual hobby notes. The photographs depicted excavation sites, half-buried statues, and a younger Beatrice, standing triumphantly beside a group of local workers. Merrick's gaze flicked to the smaller parcel, which he gingerly unwrapped. Within the cloth was a small figurine made of what appeared to be solid gold. Its surface glinted in the evening light. In delicate etchings suggested an ancient civilization, possibly Mesoamerican. Shock coursed through him. It couldn't be real gold, could it? Even so, it was a masterful piece. The hush of the library felt expectant, as though Beatrice herself waited to see what Merrick would do next. He carefully placed the figurine on the desk and let out a low whistle. Whatever else Radcliffe House contained, it clearly held secrets more valuable than dusty heirlooms. The presence of real or possibly priceless artifacts changed everything. With a determined nod, Merrick decided he needed expert help. He'd heard mention in town of a small historical museum and a curator who specialized in local lore. Perhaps she could shed some light on who Beatrice Radcliffe had really been and why she'd hidden a trove of archaeological artifacts beneath the library floor. Early the following day, Merrick drove to the Hartley Falls Historical and Cultural Museum, a modest brick building near the town center. Its facade bore the wear of age and budget constraints. Faded posters in the window, a small wooden sign that read "Open to Sat." Inside, the place felt both cramped and charming, with shelves of curated local history, logging tools, old black and white photos of the town's founding families, and glass cases containing arrowheads and pioneer artifacts. Behind the front desk sat an energetic woman in her late 50s, sifting through a stack of papers. She wore bifocals perched on the tip of her nose and had short, practical hair, streaked with silver at the temples. Dr. Lillian Crow, Merrick asked, recalling the name he'd gotten from a helpful diner waitress the evening before the woman glanced up. Her curiosity immediately piqued by his hesitant tone and weathered appearance. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" Her voice was polite with a gentle warmth that suggested she was used to guiding curious townsfolk. Merrick introduced himself, explaining that he had recently inherited Radcliffe House from Beatrice Radcliffe. That alone made Lillian's eyebrows shoot up. Evidently, she recognized the name. She invited him to step into her cluttered office, which doubled as an archival workspace. Boxes labeled Town Council Minutes 1930 to 1950 and Radcliffe Collection were stacked haphazardly along the walls. A battered filing cabinet stood in one corner, plastered with magnets from various historical conventions. When Merrick cautiously produced the small gold figurine, safely wrapped in cloth, Lillian's eyes widened. All the color drained from her cheeks as she handled it with the reverence of an archaeologist unearthing a lost relic. "You found this at Radcliffe House?" she asked, her voice hushed with awe. He nodded, then presented her with Beatrice's field notes. As Lillian read, her demeanor shifted from fascination to growing alarm. These references, Aztec, or even earlier, and it mentions forgeries in major museums. Good heavens, I've read about Dr. Beatrice Radcliffe in old academic journals. She vanished under mysterious circumstances decades ago, rumored to have discovered something that threatened the reputations of powerful people. Merrick felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had stumbled onto something far more complicated than a dusty family secret. "Why would she hide all this?" he asked. Lillian adjusted her bifocals, scanning another page. Possibly because what she found contradicted established narratives. If she tried to expose it, certain institutions might have discredited her, or worse. There were rumors she faced legal challenges, lost funding, and disappeared soon after. Their conversation was interrupted by the museum's door slamming open. A tall man in an expensive suit strode in, scanning the exhibits as though searching for something. The man's stern face softened momentarily when he spotted Merrick. Lillian gave a tight smile. "Desmond Crane," she whispered, local attorney, and not always known for his scruples. Before Merrick could react, Crane rapped on the office door. His gaze settling on the gold figurine. "Mr. Donovan," he said smoothly, "I represent certain interests related to the Radcliffe estate. I heard you might have found something unusual." Lillian closed the field notes swiftly, a protective glimmer in her eyes. Merrick stiffened, unsure how much Crane already knew. Instinct told him that a quiet life in retirement would not be part of his immediate future. That afternoon, Merrick and Lillian retreated to Radcliffe House to continue examining Beatrice's papers, away from prying eyes. Kep trotted behind them, tail wagging, seemingly oblivious to the tension that hovered in the air. As soon as they crossed the threshold, Lillian's fascination with the old mansion was clear. She marveled at the carved banisters, the high ceilings, and the faint floral patterns still visible in the wallpaper. It must have been magnificent in its day, she remarked, running a hand over the dusty mantle of the front parlor's fireplace. Merrick led her to the library where he had discovered the hidden compartment. With methodical care, they laid out the items from the metal box, the golden figurine, several sets of field notes, letters typed on onion skin paper, and numerous black and white photographs. One image showed Beatrice in a remote jungle setting, standing beside a half-excavated stone relief. Another captured her at what looked like a conference flanked by stern-faced men in suits, scribbled on the back. Vienna Symposium, 1962. They pored over the documents well into the evening, Lillian occasionally gasping at some new revelation. According to the notice, Beatrice Radcliffe had stumbled upon evidence of a sweeping fraud in the academic and museum communities. Dozens of prized ancient relics might be forgeries expertly crafted to pass for genuine antiquities. Some of these fakes had ended up in prestigious institutions, propped up by experts either duped or complicit. Beatrice apparently believed she had located authentic counterparts in a remote region of Mexico. Photograph site sketches and personal correspondences suggested she had begun to uncover the real artifacts that would prove the forgeries existed, thereby threatening powerful figures who stood to lose prestige and fortune. Then abruptly, her correspondence ended. Why hide the genuine artifacts here, Merrick mused, flipping through the last pages of her journal. Lillian tapped a line in the notes. She planned to reveal her discovery publicly, but only once she'd confirmed every detail. She feared sabotage or even violence if she attempted to blow the whistle too soon. A chill ran through Merrick. Was that why she disappeared? He glanced around, half expecting the creaking house to yield some ghostly answer. The moment felt fraught with both significance and danger. Lillian suggested they bring these items to the museum's secure storage, but Merrick hesitated. If word spread that such valuable artifacts and explosive evidence were in town, the threats could escalate. Besides, Desmond Crane's abrupt appearance at the museum signaled that others already had an inkling something important was afoot. Could we keep them here, but maybe better hidden? Merrick asked. Lillian nodded thoughtfully. For now, perhaps, but if these notes are accurate, unscrupulous collectors or institutions might do anything to bury the truth. She sighed, rubbing her temples. We'll need resources, legal backing, and possibly press coverage at the right moment. But first, we must understand exactly what we have. She glanced around at the peeling wallpaper in silent corridors. This house is part of Beatrice's legacy. Maybe it can protect her truth until we're ready. Fatigue weighed on them, but a spark of shared purpose shone in Lillian's eyes as she gazed at Merrick. They were strangers until this morning, yet they already felt like allies in a quest that transcended personal gain. Kep thumped his tail sleepily by the fireplace, as if affirming that, for now, this old mansion might be the safest place for the secrets of Beatrice Radcliffe. Before turning in for the night, Merrick placed the metal box in a padlocked trunk in a small storage room behind the library, then slid a heavy armoire in front of the door. It was a meager precaution, but it made him feel a modicum of control amid the swirl of newfound uncertainty. Morning arrived with an insistent knock on the front door. Merrick roused himself from a fitful sleep in an upstairs bedroom, still furnished with a sagging bed frame and a single nightstand. Kep barked in the hall, roused by the noise. Lillian, who had slept in a makeshift cot in a smaller adjacent room, emerged bleary-eyed but resolute. Together they descended the staircase, uncertain who might be calling so early. They found Desmond Crane standing on the porch, looking entirely too polished for the disrepair of Radcliffe House. Behind him, a younger man in a dark suit clutched a briefcase. Mr. Donovan, Crane said, doffing his hat in a mock gesture of courtesy. May we come in? We have some matters to discuss regarding the estate. Lillian tensed, but Merrick nodded reluctantly. The last thing he wanted was a standoff that might escalate. Inside, Crane and his associate peered about the foyer with a mixture of interest and distaste. This property has quite the history, Crane noted. Beatrice Radcliffe was a remarkable woman. My firm helped manage certain aspects of her affairs. He paused as if waiting for Merrick to fill the silence. When no one spoke, he continued. We understand you might have discovered some documents and items belonging to her research. Items she did not want publicly disclosed. Merrick clenched his jaw. Lillian was about to protest when Crane raised a placating hand. Now, no need for hostility. I merely wish to ensure that everything is handled legally. Some of these artifacts, if they truly are, what I suspect could be subject to international laws, repatriation claims, or even litigation from private collectors. My goal is to help you navigate these legal minefields. His tone was smooth as silk, but Merrick felt a cold prickle at the back of his neck. This was no benevolent advisor he suspected, but a gatekeeper for powerful interests who wanted to keep a lid on the truth. Pretending to consider the offer, Merrick showed Crane and his associate only the foyer and parlor. He spoke vaguely of old papers, omitting specifics about the gold figurine or the entire trove. Lillian maintained a studied silence. Crane's associate took notes on a slim tablet, occasionally glancing at Merrick with an air of polite skepticism. After half an hour of cordial but tense conversation, Crane handed Merrick a business card. Should you come across anything sensitive, contact me. My firm is prepared to compensate you handsomely for maintaining confidentiality. The subtext was clear. Hush money. Merrick forced a polite smile and escorted them to the door. As soon as their sleek black sedan disappeared down the long driveway, Lillian let out a breath she'd been holding. That was more than just curiosity. They're fishing for information. Merrick nodded grimly. Feels like a warning. They spent the next hour discussing their options. Lillian proposed contacting an old colleague at a large university's anthropology department, someone with the expertise and moral fortitude to authenticate the artifacts. But Merrick worried about tipping their hand too soon. In the end, they agreed to continue their own study, first building an airtight case around Beatrice's findings before involving bigger institutions or the media. They needed the upper hand, and that meant staying a step ahead of Crane's attempts to seize or discredit the discovery. As they reconvened in the library, Merrick couldn't help but feel that Radcliffe House itself was watching over them, its silent halls and hidden compartments waiting to reveal yet more secrets. The following week brought a delicate dance of research repair work and covert inquiries. By day, Merrick tried to address the most pressing problems in the mansion, a leaking roof over the west wing, loose floorboards that threatened to trip unsuspecting visitors, and a faulty electrical system that flickered ominously whenever they plugged in more than two appliances at once. At first, he worked alone, perched on a ladder, or hunched under a sink, recalling skills he'd honed on the farm. Lillian pitched in when she could, though her expertise was more suited to cataloging and interpreting the materials from Beatrice's trove. By night, under the soft glow of antique lamps, they pored over the newly deciphered notes and photographs, cross-referencing them with public records. Lillian accessed through the museum's modest archive. Kep often lay sprawled on a rug tail, occasionally thumping whenever Merrick glanced his way. Slowly, they assembled a mosaic of Beatrice Radcliffe's final years. She had traveled extensively in Mesoamerica, gathering evidence that certain high-profile artifacts displayed in European and American museums were in fact elaborate fakes. The real pieces, she believed, had been siphoned off by a clandestine network of profiteers. Some of her letters hinted at threats from unnamed individuals determined to silence her revelations. Amid these revelations, Merrick found unexpected comfort in Lillian's company. They shared late-night cups of tea, discussing not just the significance of the artifacts, but also more personal topics: her early fascination with local history, his years struggling on the farm, the pain of losing Margaret, and the small joys that still sparkled in daily life. Often she would place a reassuring hand on his arm, and he would feel his old cynicism waver. There was something about the synergy of their efforts that felt healing, as though in preserving Beatrice's lost legacy, they were reclaiming parts of themselves. The precariousness of their situation crystallized when Merrick noticed a dark sedan idling across the street one morning. He caught a glimpse of the driver, possibly Crane's associate, possibly someone new. When he stepped outside, the car sped off. Anonymous phone calls to the museum became frequent, with the caller hanging up as soon as Lillian answered. The sense of being watched settled over them like a cold mist. Amid these tensions, an opportunity arose. Lillian received an invitation to present a small talk at the Hartley Falls Town Hall. The council was deliberating on whether to reduce funding for the museum or find a new revenue stream to support cultural heritage. The meeting scheduled for the next week would draw many locals, including potential donors. Lillian believed it could be a chance to rally community support, maybe even raise awareness that important discoveries were being made right in their midst. Merrick was more cautious. What if Crane or his people show up? This might paint a target on our backs. Lillian pursed her lips. They already know we have something. Hiding in the shadows won't help. If the town stands behind us, that might discourage the more brazen attempts to silence us. Finally, Merrick agreed. Perhaps he reasoned transparency could be their shield. If the entire community knew that something significant lay within Radcliffe House, it would be harder for powerful interests to bully them into silence. The question lingered. Would the folks of Hartley Falls embrace this discovery as an opportunity for revitalization? Or would they view it as yet another burden for a struggling small town? On the night of the town hall meeting, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Merrick and Lillian arrived early to set up a small display board with photographs, images of the mansion's exterior, and a few non-controversial snapshots from Beatrice's notes, enough to pique curiosity without revealing the explosive details. Rows of folding chairs faced a raised platform where the town council, led by a grizzled mayor named George Haskins, would review proposals and field questions. Residents filed in, some chatting amiably about local issues, road maintenance, property taxes, and upcoming 4th of July parade. When the meeting came to order, the auditorium lights dimmed and a spotlight shone on the podium. The first few agenda items covered mundane budgetary concerns. Then it was Lillian's turn. She stepped up, her posture upright and confident. Merrick, seated in the first row with Kep at his feet, felt a swell of admiration. Quietly, he remembered how Margaret once championed local causes in Montana. He wondered if somewhere Margaret was smiling at the fact he'd found another woman of conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, Lillian began, her voice carrying a calm authority. I'm here on behalf of the Hartley Falls Historical and Cultural Museum, requesting the council's support in preserving our town's heritage. As many of you know, funding has been cut drastically in recent years, and we risk losing an important asset. She clicked through a short slideshow, pictures of school children on museum field trips, older residents sharing oral histories, and finally the battered front of Radcliffe House. Gasps rose from the audience and heads nodded. Everyone recognized that once stately facade. Today I want to share a new development, she continued, in collaboration with Mr. Merrick Donovan, who recently inherited Radcliffe House. We've discovered that this estate may contain historically significant materials. While we can't yet disclose everything, I believe these items could attract researchers, tourism, and educational opportunities, breathing fresh life into Hartley Falls. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some faces lit with curiosity, others frowned, perhaps skeptical or wary of change. A council member, an older woman in a neat sweater, asked pointedly, "What does that mean in terms of cost to the town?" "We're already strained for funds." Lillian nodded, acknowledging the concern. "We're seeking to raise private grants and donations to cover any specialized restoration or archiving. What we need from the council is moral support, an agreement in principle that the museum remains a valued community cornerstone rather than a budgetary afterthought." Mayor Haskins cleared his throat. "This is indeed intriguing, but how credible are these historically significant materials? We don't want to base our decisions on rumor." At that moment, Merrick stood, a tremor of nerves in his stomach. He introduced himself, referencing the farmland he lost in Montana, the heartbreak he'd endured, and the improbable inheritance that brought him to Hartley Falls. "I'm not an archaeologist," he said plainly, "but I've seen enough to know that what's hidden in Radcliffe House isn't just old junk to Crow. Here believes it could change how we view certain aspects of history. If we do this right, if we protect these items and share them responsibly, it could be the best thing to happen to this town in a long time." A series of quiet nods and low chatter indicated some measure of acceptance. The mayor promised to review the matter further. Lillian stepped down to polite applause, meeting Merrick's gaze with relief. Yet as Merrick scanned the room, he spotted Desmond Crane at the back, standing with arms folded. The attorney's expression was inscrutable, and Merrick felt a flicker of apprehension. Their public declaration might have just escalated the stakes in ways they couldn't fully predict. In the days following the town hall, Hartley Falls buzzed with rumors about the so-called treasure hidden at Radcliffe House. Some locals speculated it was pirate gold. Others claimed it might be contraband artwork. Gossip flew around the diner's lunch counter and the barbershop. A few adventurous souls even attempted to wander onto the estate's grounds, hoping for a glimpse of something unusual. Merrick found himself chasing off a pair of teenagers who had hopped the fence, apparently on a dare. While the curiosity was mostly harmless, it added a fresh layer of anxiety. Each night, Merrick double-checked the locks and windows, cursing the mansion's drafty old frames. He and Lillian pressed forward with their research, but found themselves frequently interrupted. Phone calls from reporters trickled in, small-time bloggers who wanted a scoop, and even a regional newspaper journalist who camped outside the gates one afternoon, snapping photos of the mansion's sagging porch. Desmond Crane, too, made his presence known, sending polite emails, reminding Merrick that any illicitly acquired artifacts could lead to legal trouble if not properly disclosed. To gain time and protection, Lillian initiated contact with Professor Charles Barrington, a retired archaeology expert she'd known from her university days. He's a bit of a legend, she confided to Merrick. He spent decades studying Mesoamerican cultures and is fiercely ethical. If we can get him to authenticate what we have, it'll carry real weight. Plus, he's not easily intimidated by corporate or institutional pressure. Professor Barrington agreed to visit Hartley Falls upon hearing hints of Beatrice Radcliffe's unfulfilled research. The plan was to show him select pieces of evidence once he arrived seeking his professional opinion. Despite the swirling tension life carried on, the local mechanic replaced a cracked belt on Merrick's aging pickup, refusing payment after hearing about his efforts to help the museum. An elderly neighbor dropped by with fresh blackberry muffins, telling Merrick that she'd known Beatrice as a young girl, describing her as too smart for her own good. Even the mayor invited Merrick to the local Rotary Club dinner. Slowly, Merrick felt himself adopting a role in the community, a reluctant caretaker of not just an old mansion, but of a secret that could define the town's future. The real moment of reckoning came late one night when Merrick heard a crash in the library. Grabbing a flashlight and an old baseball bat, he raced downstairs with Kep at his side, heart pounding in his ears. A window was shattered. Glass littered the floor. Behind a row of shelves, a figure in dark clothing crouched, rummaging through drawers. "Stop!" Merrick shouted, shining the flashlight beam on the intruder. The person lunged, knocking the flashlight from Merrick's grip. Kep growled ferociously, lunging at the stranger's ankles. In the confusion, the intruder managed to slip away, darting through the broken window into the night. By the time Merrick found Lillian, she had been awakened by the commotion. He was trembling with anger and adrenaline. The metal box hidden in the trunk remained untouched, but the break-in was undeniable proof that someone was willing to break the law to get at Beatrice Radcliffe's legacy. As he swept up shards of glass, Merrick realized this was only the beginning. Whoever wanted to bury Beatrice's secret wasn't going to stop at polite warnings. 2 days later, Professor Charles Barrington arrived in an unassuming, compact car, stepping out onto the gravel driveway with the air of a man forever curious. In his early 70s, he had a wiry frame, a neat gray beard, and sharp eyes that revealed a keen intellect. When Lillian introduced him to Merrick, the professor offered a firm handshake and an avuncular smile. "Dr. Crow speaks highly of you, Mr. Donovan. Says you're the unlikely guardian of a great historical puzzle." Inside Radcliffe House, they gathered in the library, still sporting plywood over the window from the recent break-in. Kep curled at Merrick's feet, calm but alert. Lillian brought out the small gold figurine, carefully unwrapping it. She and Barrington examined it under a magnifying glass. The professor's eyes lit with immediate recognition of Mesoamerican symbolism, jaguar motifs, stylized feathers that might link it to certain ceremonial rites. He muttered excitedly about the possibility of a transitional piece between distinct cultural phases. When they showed him Beatrice's field notes, Barrington's excitement grew. He snapped photos with his phone, flipping through each page with delicate care. "This is extraordinary," he breathed. If her records are authentic, she identified not just forged artifacts, but also traced where the real ones ended up. Names of dealers, curators, even museum directors. He tapped one page that listed initials next to inventory numbers. "You see, this might implicate major institutions if proven in court or in front of an academic board." No wonder she felt threatened. Merrick felt a knot of tension unwind, replaced by renewed apprehension. "Then it's real, all of it," he murmured. Barrington looked at him gravely. "I'd need more thorough testing to confirm the figurine's authenticity, but everything suggests Dr. Beatrice Radcliffe was onto something huge. Her disappearance may not have been voluntary." The implication hung in the air. Powerful individuals had a vested interest in keeping these revelations buried. That afternoon, Barrington made a crucial suggestion. Catalog everything. Systematically digital copies, high-resolution photographs, transcriptions, then store them securely, perhaps off-site or in multiple locations, so if something happens here, the information doesn't vanish. He also advised they contact a few reputable museums or universities to quietly gauge support, but keep it discreet for now. As evening approached, the three found themselves in a corner of the kitchen, which Merrick had partially cleared. Over a simple dinner, they discussed strategy. Barrington recommended a press conference only after they had substantial proof, possibly hosted by a credible institution that had no ties to the forgers. Lillian believed the local community should be informed once they had a firm plan. After all, the town's future might hinge on the correct handling of such a sensational discovery. Merrick found his head spinning. He'd come here expecting to salvage what remained of his life, not to stand at the epicenter of a historical scandal. Outside wind whipped through the pines, rattling old windows. The tension felt almost electric, as if the house itself knew that a storm was brewing, one that threatened to shake old foundations beyond just plaster and wood. Around the worn kitchen table they formed a pact. Keep searching, keep cataloging, and keep an eye on each other's safety. They would honor Beatrice Radcliffe's legacy by bringing her work to light, even if it meant standing against powerful forces determined to silence the past. When Barrington retired for the night in a spare bedroom, Merrick caught Lillian's gaze. Unspoken words passed between them. Nothing in his old farming life had prepared him for this. Yet he felt oddly certain that he was exactly where he needed to be. The break-ins and strange cars lurking near Radcliffe House became more frequent. Merrick took to patrolling the grounds at odd hours, a heavy-duty flashlight in one hand, an old hunting rifle slung over his shoulder, more for deterrence than actual use. Kep's sharp hearing and protective nature were a comfort, but each creeping shadow still set Merrick's nerves on edge. Lillian split her tights between her small apartment above the museum and the mansion, unwilling to leave Merrick alone for too long. Their collaboration had grown into a true friendship, peppered with fleeting moments of deeper feeling that they both recognized but didn't fully acknowledge. There simply wasn't time. Professor Barrington spent his days immersed in analysis. He carefully examined each artifact and cross-referenced Beatrice's notes with known academic catalogs. On more than one occasion, he shook his head in amazement, declaring that if the broader academic world confirmed these findings, entire wings of prestigious museums might be called into question. He typed up preliminary reports and suggested they form an official Radcliffe Foundation to control the narrative. We must be proactive, he insisted. If we let unscrupulous interests frame our discovery, they'll discredit us or buy us out before the truth surfaces. Meanwhile, Desmond Crane applied pressure from every angle. He left voicemail messages urging Merrick to reconsider the risks of stirring up controversy. One day, Lillian returned from the museum, pale-faced, brandishing a letter from Crane's law firm, implying they had documentation that could challenge Merrick's claim to Radcliffe House. They're threatening to tie up the inheritance in probate court, she explained, her voice shaking. It's a scare tactic, but if it succeeds, you could be forced out of the mansion. Merrick's anger boiled, but Barrington merely arched an eyebrow. A typical ploy. They can't stop the truth, but they can stall, hoping we get spooked. To brace themselves, they began relocating some materials to the museum's vault and also to a safe deposit box at a local bank. Barrington set up under his name. They divided the trove, ensuring no single break-in could eradicate the evidence. Each item was photographed in high resolution. Duplicates were stored on encrypted drives. Lillian, methodical and detail-oriented, supervised these efforts with the precision of a seasoned archivist. Merrick, though new to such complexities, felt a surge of responsibility. He remembered how helpless he'd felt when Margaret's medical bills piled up, but this time he refused to be cornered again by powerful forces. The tension around town grew thick. Some residents openly showed support, dropping off groceries, offering to keep watch at the gate, or simply stopping by to ask about progress. Others worried that if big trouble descended on Hartley Falls, it could tarnish the town's quiet reputation. The mayor, sensing both risk and opportunity, tried to remain neutral until he had concrete facts, while local gossip soared. Through it all, Merrick noticed that each day he spent safeguarding Beatrice's secrets, he also found himself healing small parts of his own soul. Odd as it seemed, the mansion's hidden past gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Late one night, after finishing a marathon session of cataloging with Lillian, Merrick stepped out onto the front porch. The air was cool and still. Stars glimmered above the dark silhouette of the pines. He closed his eyes, recalling the open skies of Montana, half expecting a wave of sorrow to overwhelm him. Instead, he felt a gentle sense of solace. Margaret was gone, but in some inexplicable way, her memory and this new challenge were guiding him forward. When Lillian joined him, resting a hand lightly on his shoulder, he realized that the mansion wasn't the only source of light that had entered his life. On a misty Saturday morning, Merrick and Lillian gathered a few townspeople at the museum for what they termed a soft reveal. They chose a handful of trusted individuals, longtime residents, local business owners, and a sympathetic reporter from the county newspaper. In a closed-door session, they unveiled some of the less incendiary items: the partial journals, a few authentic carvings and historical photos, that connected Beatrice Radcliffe to major archaeological circles. Professor Barrington walked them through the significance, explaining how these artifacts could attract scholarly interest and potentially spark new tourism to boost the local economy. The reaction was a hopeful blend of awe and pride. One elderly resident, Ms. Rosen, recalled meeting Beatrice as a child. She was always reading big books about lost cities. Ms. Rosen said, wiping away tears. We all thought she'd left forever, but now it's like she's back to help Hartley Falls in a different way. A local teacher excitedly suggested field trips, new lesson plans, and perhaps a small exhibit at the museum to inspire students about real historical detective work happening in their own backyard. Just as momentum began to build, Lillian received an urgent text from a volunteer stationed at Radcliffe House. Strangers had been spotted prowling near the back gardens. Merrick felt a jolt of fear. Had someone orchestrated a break-in while they were gone? The group swiftly disbanded, several townspeople pledging to drive by and keep watch. Merrick, Lillian, and Barrington returned to the mansion, hearts pounding. They found the garden gate forced open, but no immediate sign of the intruders. In the midst of searching for any stolen items, they discovered something far more troubling. The old trunk in the storage room had been tampered with. The lock was broken, though the metal box inside remained sealed. Either the intruders hadn't had time to finish, or they were searching for something else. A sense of vulnerability washed over them all. That evening, after reinforcing the gates and windows, Merrick convened a meeting in the library with Lillian and Barrington. This is untenable, the professor declared, pacing back and forth. We must bring more public awareness so the thieves can't act in secret. But we also have to protect the most critical evidence from those who want to destroy it. Lillian proposed accelerating their plan to go public with a press conference, inviting credible archaeologists while ensuring the entire trove was kept in multiple secure locations. She believed that a strong show of legitimacy would deter clandestine sabotage. Merrick stared at the gold figurine, remembering how it first made him feel, a sense of stepping into a world he never imagined. Let's do it, he said quietly. I'm done hiding. If we lose control of the narrative now, everything Beatrice worked for might be for nothing. We give the best possible front, gather the right allies, and let the truth stand on its own. They decided on a date 1 week away, giving them time to finalize the catalog, send invitations, and arrange for at least a small security presence. The mayor, once he heard of the plan, pledged official support, though part of Merrick wondered if the mayor was more motivated by potential economic gains than by moral conviction. Nevertheless, any help was welcome. As the day's light faded from the mansion windows, they each felt the weight of the coming week. It would be a defining moment for Hartley Falls, and perhaps for the legacy of a long-lost archaeologist who had entrusted the future to a lonely farmer seeking hope. The week leading up to the press conference was a whirlwind of activity. Merrick oversaw a small team of volunteers to improve security around Radcliffe House, installing motion sensor lights, reinforcing locks, and even setting up a makeshift fence around the perimeter. Barrington and Lillian worked tirelessly to finalize their presentations, verifying facts, cross-checking historical references, and preparing slides that would illustrate Beatrice Radcliffe's findings. Local hardware stores donated materials for the property improvements, sensing an opportunity to support what could become a landmark event for the town's revitalization. Amid this organized chaos, Merrick's mind often drifted to Margaret. A year ago, he was consumed by hospital visits and foreclosure notices. Now he was at the center of an archaeological controversy, forging alliances with academics and civic leaders. He found himself strangely grateful for the second chance life had offered, even if it came wrapped in danger. Some nights he would stand at the edge of the overgrown rose garden, near a patch of earth where he considered scattering Margaret's ashes. Not yet, he would murmur, almost expecting her warm laughter to reply. He wanted this house to feel like home first, a place of renewal rather than sorrow. The day before the press conference, journalists began trickling into Hartley Falls. A national newspaper sent a junior correspondent curious about the rumored Mesoamerican gold in an Oregon mansion. A film crew from a local television station also arrived, cameras at the ready. Lillian gave them a brief tour of the museum's public exhibits, keeping the sensitive materials under wraps until the official unveiling. Some townsfolk complained about the sudden influx of strangers crowding the diner and taking up all the motel rooms, but others rejoiced at the infusion of outside attention and money. That evening, while Merrick and Barrington rehearsed their parts of the presentation, Lillian's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message read, "Drop the press conference or regret it. We have the means to bury this." Fear flickered across her face as she showed it to the men. Barrington's jaw tightened. Merrick felt a cold surge of protective anger. They were so close to exposing the truth, he refused to be cowed by threats. Determined, they pressed on. By midnight, all major materials were moved to the museum's secured archive for display under watchful volunteers. The golden figurine and the most damning documents, those implicating high-profile curators in the forgery scandal, were locked away in a bank's safe deposit box. Even if the mansion were attacked again, the critical evidence wouldn't be there. Finally, the morning of the press conference arrived. The town hall auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Rows of chairs faced a makeshift stage where microphones stood. The mayor council members, a small cadre of invited scholars, and about 24 reporters waited. Merrick, seated off to one side with Kep at his feet, swallowed the dryness in his throat. Lillian began the proceedings, introducing the Radcliffe collection and the broad strokes of its historical significance. Professor Barrington offered an impassioned explanation of how these artifacts could reshape understanding of Mesoamerican trade and cultural exchange if fully authenticated. Then Merrick took the stage. His voice trembled initially, but he steadied as he recounted the improbable path that brought him here. Losing his farm, inheriting a crumbling mansion, and discovering Beatrice's hidden legacy, he spoke from the heart, describing how this find wasn't just about gold or prestige, but about a community rallying together to preserve truth and honor the dead. Cameras flashed, pens scrawled furiously. For a moment, Merrick felt unstoppable, buoyed by collective goodwill. But in the back of his mind, he knew the real test would come once the press coverage spread and the shadows from powerful adversaries lengthened. The day after the press conference felt surreal. News outlets ran stories featuring titles like Montana Farmer Uncovers Global Archaeology Scandal and Lost Legacy of Dr. Beatrice Radcliffe, Hartley Falls Awakened, to find camera crews on Main Street, local shops brimming with curious onlookers, and the phone at the museum ringing off the hook. Donations poured in, from small checks by supportive retirees to a sizable pledge by a philanthropic foundation dedicated to historical preservation. The mayor, who once wavered, now sported a grin wide enough to rival the redwood trees, announcing a new partnership with the Radcliffe Foundation to renovate both the mansion and certain public spaces in town. Merrick, however, felt an undercurrent of anxiety. Publicity was a double-edged sword. While it offered protection by shining a bright spotlight, it also attracted more unscrupulous eyes. Lillian tried to reassure him that with so many major outlets watching, any overt intimidation would backfire on those responsible. Still, Merrick couldn't shake the memory of the menacing text or the broken window. He took comfort in the fact that most of the crucial evidence was either locked in the bank or stored under watchful guard at the museum. Professor Barrington received calls from old academic acquaintances. Some offered congratulations, eager to be part of the next big find. Others questioned the authenticity of the claims, worried about the potential scandal. If museums they revered were proven to have forged items, Barrington calmly proposed that a neutral international panel of experts be convened to examine the artifacts. The truth can withstand scrutiny, he said, his voice unwavering, but those with hidden agendas may balk at open investigation. Desmond Crane reemerged, this time with an air of resignation. He arrived at the museum in the late afternoon, weaving through camera crews with practiced ease. Lillian led him to a private corner. "Are you here to threaten us again, Mr. Crane?" she asked coldly. The attorney rubbed his temples, adopting a conciliatory tone. "On the contrary, Dr. Crow, my firm has been directed to withdraw certain objections. We're offering to help broker a resolution, perhaps expedite the formal acceptance of the Radcliffe estate to Mr. Donovan in exchange for minimal mention of certain parties in the final report." Merrick, who had stepped out of a meeting with a journalist, caught the last part of Crane's proposition. The offer reeked of hush money. "I'm not selling the truth," he said bluntly. Crane plastered on a thin smile. "Of course not. I'm merely suggesting we can ease some bureaucratic burdens if you refrain from publicly naming certain individuals involved in questionable artifact acquisitions." It was Lillian's turn to speak. She folded her arms. "Our interest isn't in personal vendettas. It's about historical integrity. If people broke the law to fake or smuggle artifacts, they'll face consequences. We won't hide that." Crane's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're making powerful enemies. Don't expect them to vanish just because of a press conference." Then he turned and strode away, leaving a tense hush in his wake. As the shadows lengthened outside the museum windows, Merrick and Lillian exchanged a look that combined relief and dread. They were winning support, but also inciting the anger of those who had much to lose. We can't let up now, she whispered, her voice resolute. Beatrice Radcliffe deserves closure, and so do the countless people deceived by those forgeries. Merrick placed a hand gently on her shoulder. We're in this together, he said, feeling the weight of that promise in every syllable. Autumn leaves were beginning to turn gold and crimson by the time Hartley Falls settled into its new normal. Journalists still popped in occasionally, but the frenzy had quieted. A consortium of archaeologists had formed an interim review board to authenticate the Radcliffe artifacts, with visits scheduled over the coming months. The museum received grants enabling it to hire additional staff, and the mansion, now officially in Merrick's name, was earmarked for partial renovation as a research center and cultural site. Town businesses flourished with the increased tourism, and a local bed and breakfast advertised historic tours of Radcliffe House for curious travelers. In the midst of all this, Merrick and Lillian discovered a sense of peace. Though daily tasks still involved endless logistical hurdles, coordinating with academics, fending off occasional legal posturing from Crane's firm, and managing the care of fragile documents, the fear of clandestine break-ins and intimidation had receded. The spotlight of public attention served as their shield, and with each passing day, it felt like Beatrice Radcliffe's vision was growing stronger, not weaker. Professor Barrington, preparing for a semester-long lecture circuit, suggested a final celebratory dinner. Before he departed, they held it in Radcliffe House's old dining room, which volunteers had managed to clean and refurbish. The overhead chandelier flickered with fresh bulbs and rewired circuitry, throwing warm light on the decades-old wallpaper. Around the table sat Merrick, Lillian, Barrington, a few museum staff, and two local leaders who had helped champion the cause. Kep, ever faithful, lay contentedly at Merrick's feet, tail wagging, whenever someone passed a scrap of food his way. After toasts were made, many in honor of Beatrice, Lillian pulled Merrick aside. "Walk with me," she said softly. The two slipped out to the back porch, stepping into the crisp night air. A crescent moon hung low, casting pale light across the overgrown gardens. Merrick let out a small sigh, recalling the day he first arrived, uncertain and grieving. Now, the house wasn't a symbol of final desperation. It was a place of renewal. Lillian took a slow breath. "You know, I never expected to find something like this sense of purpose. I mean, at my age, I thought I'd just manage the museum until retirement. But this entire journey, it's awakened something in me." She paused, carefully gauging Merrick's reaction. "And it's not just about the artifacts." Warmth filled Merrick's chest. He gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. "I feel the same," he admitted. "After losing Margaret, I thought I'd just fade away. But life brought me here, to this house, to you. Maybe in unraveling Beatrice's mystery, I've also reclaimed parts of my own soul." The words felt momentous, as if bridging the distance between past sorrows and future hopes. For a moment, they stood quietly listening to the night sounds. Crickets in the brush, a distant owl. Then Merrick reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Inside was a simple silver ring. He had found it among Margaret's keepsakes, originally intended as an anniversary gift. He gently held Lillian's hand. "I don't have all the answers," he began, voice trembling slightly, "but I know that what we've built here in this old house and in our hearts deserves a chance. Will you stay by my side, come what may?" Tears glimmered in Lillian's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "From dusty floorboards to hidden treasures, from heartbreak to hope, I choose this life with you." In the hush of that moonlit garden, they sealed the promise with a tender embrace, kept patting over to them as if to offer his silent canine approval. Above them, the weathered spires of Radcliffe House stood tall and proud, a testament that even the most forgotten legacies can find new purpose when guided by courage, community, and love. In the end, Radcliffe House becomes more than just a battered mansion. It's a place where each character confronts both their own past and a history far older than any single life. Personally, I find it uplifting how a broken man desperate for purpose unearths a mystery that pulls people together in an unstoppable tide of truth. Through countless doubts and dangers, the reward isn't just golden statuettes or academic fame. It's the sense of belonging and shining that yet arises when ordinary folks unite for something that matters to everyone. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you expect that outcome? How do you feel about uncovering the lost notes and artifacts, or the community's stand against powerful adversaries? Please share your comments and opinions below so we can discuss them together. Your insights make these stories truly come alive.